Well, hello again. I just want to welcome everyone to today's class, Grief and the Holidays. It's kind of hard to talk about the holidays for me today, sitting in a balmy 75-degree weather, but here we are. So there's a few more connections being made, so I'm just going to chit-chat for a second and share with you that this is an annual class I do, and I'm so glad you're joining. It's important to talk about both of these things, grief in particular, and our losses individually and collectively, but also how we communicate and cope during strenuous times, stressful times like holidays, anniversaries, birthdays, or just a good old weekend. Sometimes we are just stressed out about things, and then our grief is triggered by that. So today we're going to talk a little bit about those sorts of things. And I have everyone muted. So if you will, just look for your unmute button because there will be a time of sharing today as well. So whenever I tell you or ask you to share, then please unmute yourself and do that. So as we get started today, I just again want to welcome you. Thanks for joining us. We have about 30 people taking this class today, which is a great turnout. And some of you are taking it live, and then others will be taking it by the recorded version. So welcome to everyone. Grief in the holidays. It is a thing, isn't it? You know, when I thought about how to even begin talking about it, I thought about what the season once was for us, the season that once brought anticipation or excitement, can then heighten our awareness, if you will, of our loss and of our pain, which then causes further anxiety and dread. I mean, it just spirals downhill, if you will. So when the entire world seems consumed by holiday, when it's consumed by the tinsel and the glitter and the parties and the presents, and everybody's wanting to make a list of some sort, and when we are the ones experiencing loss and grief, all of that seems a little trivial to us. Sometimes it seems almost sacrilegious to come into a time of celebration when we feel such sorrow. So today we're going to talk a little bit about something I talk about in grief all the time, which is the word permission. We have to give ourselves permission to do whatever we need to do this holiday season in order to get through it in a healthy manner. Sometimes that might mean creating a different tradition. It might mean a quiet ritual or memorial that honors our loss and our loved one's memory. And we're just trying to make room for peace. You know, one of the things that comes up in the holiday season, whatever holiday you're celebrating, you will find that there is a common thread, and that thread is the word peace. And of course, that's also a common thread in our grief journey. We're seeking and trying to find some peace for our heart, for our mind, for our family. And so today, as we talk about this, I just want to mention that we have to understand what grief really is for us. Grief is the understanding that it is a response to our loss. Grief is our normal response to loss. And the word that jumps out there is the word normal. No one has been able to define that for me yet. And when I talk about grief being your normal response to loss, I mean it just like that. It's your response to your loss, which means it's going to be different than anyone else's, and it's going to be unique unto you. And so grief is this unavoidable experience of emotions that we, at times such as the holidays, have a choice about how we respond to this and how we plan and how we prepare. So today I want to talk a little bit about what we are considering in looking at the holiday season with our grief journey so present for us. Some of you have been in grief for a while, which means you've lost someone or something some time ago, and that grief is still kind of holding on. And some of you are in what's called fresh or raw grief, which means it's new, it's weeks or months old at best. And so wherever you are, find in today's session just something that makes sense and brings peace for you. Because again, Your experience of loss and your experience of the grief journey is as unique as your own fingerprint. And so I want you to be able to find that unique nugget that will help bring you some peace and some satisfaction during this crazy time that we call the holidays. So when we're looking for that thing called peace, let's call it comfort for just a moment, then we're not only looking for comfort for ourselves sometimes, but we're looking for comfort in our family unit. We're looking for comfort in our situations, in our finances, in our health, whatever that area is that you're looking for peace and comfort in. I want you to allow yourself, again, that word permission. I can't grant you that permission. I can talk about it all day, but you're the one who says, I give myself permission. I give myself permission to grieve on my own terms, in my own time, however it looks. And I also give myself permission to not understand all of this journey and to have to kind of step into that unknown place emotionally and maybe even spiritually to find my way. Grief is the heaviest of all human emotions. Hear that again. It's the heaviest of all human emotions. What that means is it's usually including all of the other human emotions. It could be something like anger. It could be overwhelm. It could be peace or contentment, or it could be frustration. It could be so many things that funnel into this thing we call grief. And that's why it's heavy. It includes it all. And so when we think about the heaviness of our grief, I want you to visualize for just a moment walking up a really steep hill with a bucket of heavy water in your hand. And so 5-gallon bucket of water, you're going up this hill, and every step of your journey seems to get a little slower because that thing in your hand gets a little heavier. It's the same with our grief. Our grief is heavy enough as it is. And then along our journey, because we are holding it for so long and carrying it in our bodily system for so long, it becomes really heavy. Now go back to that image in your mind for just a moment. If someone walked out of the woods and said, hey, I'll help you carry that bucket up the hill, you would probably say, okay, I would love that. It wouldn't matter what color of skin they had. It wouldn't matter the language they spoke. If help arrives, you take it. And I want you to think about your grief like that heavy bucket. If it is so heavy that you are having to figure out how to even breathe again, if you're trying to figure out how to, move again, I want you to understand this thing. We understand in grief therapy that grief is diminished when it is shared. Grief is diminished when it is shared. Just like that heavy bucket, if someone could share that load, share that heavy burden with us, it lightens our load. And it's the same with our grief. It doesn't mean someone else is going to hold your grief for you, but it does mean you can share your grief and get it out of you, even for 5-10 minutes, to just share a part of your story so that your load is lightened. We'll have a time to do that today if anyone wants to do that. So we're going to talk again about permission. We're going to talk a little bit about what we do with that in this holiday season, how we maneuver this journey, and then to also include something new for the holiday season, because it didn't change. We're the ones that are in the change. And so this is the season to still be grateful for the blessings, to still notice the abundance of life and love, to be able, even in the darkness of grief, to look for and seek the light of hope, which can be affirmed and nurtured along this journey. And when we draw strength from the holiday traditions of the past that we liked, that we remember, then again, you have permission to create whatever change is necessary for you for the present and to honor your faith in your ability to handle the future. So as we begin, I just want to say again, welcome. A couple more people have joined us. So glad you're here. Let's start, if anyone wants to share, and I'm also going to be looking, by the way, at the chat box. So if you'd like to share by chat, I'll be looking at that and we can kind of talk. I love to do my classes kind of like everyone's sitting at my kitchen table. So grab a cup of coffee, whatever it is metaphorically, and let's just have a nice conversation and chat. My name is Chaz Wesley. I'm a grief counselor and a death doula, and I've been doing this work for over 20 years. So this is a free hour for you of grief counseling, of whatever questions or comments you might have, so that you can help navigate your grief. I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about where I'd like to go with this conversation. So let me find that button. I have developed what I'm calling the 4 C's, and these include some of the things that we'll talk about, but also some of the things I'd like you to remember in order to move into that direction of understanding what you can do, what you can strategically and intentionally do to get through the holiday season with more comfort, with more peace, and with less burden. So the 4 C's, as I have developed, are these things that I would call choice or choosing, communication, compromise, and compassion. Choice, communication, compromise, and compassion. So as you think about this first word, the word choice, you know, I talk a lot about consciousness studies in my classes, and I believe, this is just a Chazism, I believe the greatest level of consciousness that I know in my human form is the consciousness of choice. What that means is choice exists always. And that's a really nice thing to know, because when we feel like we don't have choices, when we feel like choices have been removed from us in one way or another, or we feel backed into a corner, even emotionally, it's nice to remember that you have choice. Sometimes the choice is to shut down. That's a choice. Happiness is also a choice. It's an interesting choice at a time like this, but it can be one of the choices. And so when we think about what you're choosing in any moment in your life experience, think about not only the choice you've made, but the cadre of choices that are available to you, some that you don't even know about or can't even define yet. So when we think about choice as it relates to grief and the holidays, I want you to think about the choices you've made in your past around the holiday season, and then the choice that you're making in your mind, at least now, for the upcoming holiday season. And then I want you to think about all of the other choices you don't even think about or know about yet. How many times have you gotten into your car, gone on a journey, and all of a sudden you run into a detour or there's road construction, and you were just sure that this was your route, this was the journey you were taking, and then all of a sudden that got all messed up in some way or another? Well, the thing was, when you had that decision, you had a choice right there. I either take the detour and somehow find my way, or I stop and I don't go anywhere, or I plow through the construction and probably, lose my license, or whatever that is. There's lots of choices. You could also take the detour and then take a detour from the detour. And so there's many, many choices that I want to talk about. And one of the choices that's most familiar with us is that we need to keep up traditions. We need to keep up traditions. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Because the truth is you don't need to do anything. And traditions are going to change over time anyway. So do you need to keep up the tradition that you've always had when you, this year, right now, are not who you've always been? Maybe you're not as strong. Maybe you're not as creative. Maybe you're not in the mood. There is choice that you could do something different. And there's also choice that you could do nothing at all. So when I say that, what does that mean? It means this, and here's the secret. You could just skip this holiday season altogether. Now you say, oh, I couldn't do that. My kids are counting on me. The world is counting on me. I couldn't break a tradition. Well, it is a choice. Whether you want to take it or not, it's still a choice. And it's often in our raw and fresh grief, a really good choice to consider. Because here's the deal. When you choose, should you choose to skip the holiday traditions and do something totally different, or even skip everything and just stay in bed that day, what's happening is you are allowing yourself permission to find some sort of peace and comfort, even if it means unplugging for a while. Have you ever gone even a day unplugged from social media or from the news or from the electronics that are next to your hand? When you do that, something within your bodily system, in your nervous system, settles. And that's what we're seeking in our time of grief, is this, to get out of the chaotic mind, to get out of the overwhelming emotions and find a place of calm and peace. And so choosing to skip the holidays altogether could do that. Now, for others, the thought of skipping that would cause more chaos and more overwhelm. So this is going to be something that we're going to show on the screen in a moment. Your holiday plan. It's not a blanket plan. It's not a blanket way of coping. This is your grief, your loss, your response, and how you are going to choose in any given moment to respond to that. I see someone typing. Who can see her? Nope. Somebody type a message or unmute and raise your hand if you want to talk a little bit. I would love to have some conversation around this. What are you choosing and what is coming up for you? And as you think about that for you, I'm going to tell one really quick story. I had a grief client just a couple of years ago who lost both of her parents in the same 4-month period. So that was quite a loss in her life, obviously. It was right before the holiday season. And she was the one who everyone gathered at her house for that holiday. So she was always the one cooking and preparing and decorating, and it brought her joy to do so. And in her grief a couple of years ago, she came to my office and she said, I don't know if I even want to do this, but I feel responsible. I feel obliged to do it. And I noticed when she was saying this, that she was, again, in her past, thinking about all the things that she'd always done. But when she was talking about it, she caught herself and said, I'm noticing that I'm choosing to make it my responsibility. I'm choosing to feel obliged to do this. So choice is a thing. And when we can allow ourselves permission to just look at the choices, not even choosing yet, but just to look at the choices, then something might be inspired within us to reach for something that would be a little less stressful. So here's what happened to her. She, again, was the matriarch of the family in one way or another, the one hosting all the parties, the one always having the big house with all the decorations at the holiday season that everyone came to enjoy. And so on this particular year, as she was talking to me and she said, I don't know if I want to do it. I kind of want to do it. It's not going to be the same. My parents won't be there. Everyone will be sad. We're still in our fresh, raw grief. So we sat down with pen and paper for 5 minutes. And she said, here's what I usually do. And that included the big meal, the decorations, welcoming people into their home, the whole holiday thing for an afternoon. And she said, it feels so upside down this year. Everything is backwards. And you've had that feeling if you've gone through loss. Everything feels out of sync, like you've stepped out of time and the world is still spinning. You've stepped out of time and all of the rest of society is excited about the holidays, but you are not. And so as she thought about and talked about this feeling of being upside down, we developed a plan, I'm not kidding, in 10 minutes, where her enjoyment and excitement came back because she said, I could just throw a party that's upside down. So here's what ended up happening. This is a long story. I'm going to make it really brief. By the time all of that came to be, whatever holiday that was, Thanksgiving or Hanukkah, I believe, when that came to pass, she had constructed a wonderful holiday party for her family and friends that was upside down. So when she opened the door to greet everyone, she said goodbye instead of hello. When they came into her house, all the arrangements, all the decorations were upside down or askew. When she served the meal, she served dessert first because that's backwards. And she served her parents' favorite dessert, which was pineapple upside down cake, upside down. So that's pineapple upside down cake, upside right? I don't know if I got that correct. But the whole thing came to be, I mean, the cherry was on the bottom, the whipped cream was on the bottom. It looked awful, tasted the same. And she went through their whole day like this. Everything was backwards. She had the place settings backwards. Nothing made sense. And when people left from that day, they had laughed their butts off about different things. She gave out gifts that were wrapped upside down, bows on the bottom, everything. She had thought of everything. And when they left her home, instead of saying goodbye, she said, hello, great to see you. It's a holiday they will never forget. And in doing that, in allowing herself the permission to find what made sense for her, she then gave her entire family and cohort of friends this memory that will last forever. And so it can be something as drastic as that, or it can be some small thing that you want to include this holiday season. Tony says, my mother-in-law died in November of 2019 after 4 years of suffering from dementia. She was also always the center of our holiday celebrations, and this time of year is so difficult for me and my husband. Thank you, Tony, for sharing that. You know, when we lose someone to dementia or Alzheimer's or something in the dementia field, we often talk about what's called the long goodbye. And we also sometimes recognize that we have lost someone more than once, because dementia is a horrible disease if you've had anyone suffering with that. And sometimes we lose bits and pieces of that loved one over time. And so when they actually physically die, that understanding is one of relief in some people. And it's also a time of getting more deep into your grief and realizing that I may have lost their spirit or their communication or their memory, and now I've lost the physical form of them as well. So it's kind of like a double whammy. So as Tony mentioned, the center of their holiday celebrations was their mother-in-law. And this time of year is difficult. We hear that story, we know that story, we share that story. And what I want to share with you again is this thing about choice, because we also choose year after year after year to think about how difficult the holidays will be. It's a choice, and it's not a fun one, but we choose it over and over. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying that's pretty much human nature, to make it difficult on ourselves because we think we need to find some justification. We think we need to share our story in some way that may help another or may help ourselves. And that is a lovely thing. The thing I want to point out is, are you choosing to make it difficult over and over and over? And I'm not just talking to Tony here, I'm talking to everyone. We can make things difficult over and over. If you've ever worked in the corporate world or just in life in particular, then we have a story that Mondays are bad. Mondays suck. I hate Mondays. I don't like Mondays. I wish Monday was over. That's a story that we perpetuate all the time. Monday, what did Monday ever do to you? And so it's a choice that you could say, I'm not going to hate Mondays as much as I've hated them for the last 40 years. I'm going to choose a different way of being. And it's the same for our holiday season. So thank you, Tony. Let me go back to this screen because I want to share also that there is not only the consciousness of choice, But the second C in this is how we communicate and just communication in general. So when we are communicating our thoughts and our needs, we do it in our humanness in a way that isn't always sincere or authentic, not always as genuine as it could be. What I mean by that is we think people should know how we're feeling. We think they should know what to say and not to say to us at this time. And we are assuming a whole lot in that. When we are communicating our needs and our wants, it's very important to be direct, almost blunt. It doesn't mean you need to be rude. It just means put it out there what you want so that those things can be met. Our communication with our family, especially during these times of the holiday season, is one that maybe we've not had ever or not in a long time. But to find the courage to formulate a sentence that would communicate your wants, desires, which may be, I want to skip it this year. I want to do it differently this year. I don't want to do it at all this year. Finding the courage to say that is a very vulnerable thing. If any of you have ever read any of Brene Brown's work, you know, she talks about vulnerability a lot. And vulnerability in our emotional system looks from the outside in as a weakness. But the understanding of vulnerability is actually a strength for us, because in our vulnerableness, we can find courage to say things that maybe we've never said before, to be able to communicate in a way that maybe is outside of our norm, but that will actually bring us that comfort and peace that we're seeking. So think about it again in your own area of understanding, your own family unit, your own life and lifestyle. What are you communicating that you're trying to do almost telepathically? Like, you should know this. Like, I've said it once, didn't you see it on Facebook? Well, that's not how communication works. Sometimes you have to say it more than once, and sometimes you need to say it in a very direct manner. Communication is important in our grief journey because it's where we're able to find our voice again. And it's the voice of the yes and the no. I can choose yes to these things, and I can choose no to these things. And that's finding balance. That's what it means to find balance for you in a time such as this. Anyone else want to share anything before I go on, or in the chat or on live? Just unmute yourself if you'd like to. Connie.
I just wanted to share a thought that I had this morning as I was getting ready for this class, because I wasn't sure where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
And you know, I was looking at my social media this morning, and I have a picture of my mom and I on Facebook, and I've had it there for quite a while. And my thought today was, I should probably take that down. Perhaps it's been up there long enough. And so I looked through other pictures, couldn't find anything. And then I thought to myself, so who says I've got to take that down?
There you go. Yeah.
And I remember the word permission from your last class. And I thought, so I could give myself permission to leave it up there until I'm done.
That's right. That's right. Connie, thanks for sharing that. We all kind of go through times like that in our life where we should all over ourselves. Mm-hmm. We say, I should take that down. I should do this. And when we put that burden on us, then it takes us right to that place that is opposite of permission. And what it's interesting, emotionally, when we find an opposite to what we want, what's happening, whether you follow the law of attraction or you follow psychiatry or sociology, the laws apply across the board, that whatever you're giving your attention to is what's growing. And when you say, I don't want this, there's something within you automatically and simultaneously that gives voice to what you do want instead. You're just not focused on it yet. And so that's the switch to make. And so, Connie, I'm so thankful for you always. And thanks for sharing that. You don't need to do anything, and you got to choose what is right for today. You may wake up tomorrow and say it's time to take that picture down or to change it again. But for today, it was a different choice. So I love that. Paulo Lopez, you had hearted something or raised your hand. If you'd like to share, please do so.
Yeah, I hearted Connie just for the fact that it's like, who's telling me to do this? And it's like those social constructs that can feed into our brains and make us feel like it's been too long. And so I think it's beautiful that you choose to keep that up and honor yourself and honor your loved one as well. And then
Yes.
to add on, so I'm a victim advocate and I work with survivors who've experienced traumatic loss via homicide, unfortunately. And one of the things that, is very common is like, they don't get me, they don't understand me. And so what I've noticed is like, it's very normal for people like, oh, like, set those boundaries, like, let it go. Like, they don't need to understand you. But it's like, it's so great that you said that. It's like, great, nobody can read our minds. And so we have to, and just in general in life, like in order for people to understand what our needs and wants are, we have to openly communicate. And so I find that really like, I don't know, validating the fact that you say
Good.
that.
Good.
Um, because it's like, because it is that traumatic grief, like sometimes it feels like I'm coming from a different place that I may not be understanding, but it's so true. Like that communication is key in all our relationships. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paula, for giving voice to that. Communication is important in all our relationships, including our relationship with ourselves, including our relationship with our grief, including our relationship with any emotion that we have, because we are communicating with ourselves and with our emotions all the time. Just like Connie used the word should, we use the word should or shouldn't, or I wish I was, or, whatever that is, that's communication. And it's important that we discuss our choices with others who, especially those who are affected by our choices. One of the things that I always like to talk about, especially right now, I'll plug it in, is the children. When we have experienced loss in our family unit, we sometimes kind of forget about the children, especially toddlers or smaller children. And it's really important that we communicate with our children what's going on, because unfortunately, in our culture, we don't communicate well in our lineage. And then what happens is we develop habits and traditions based on no communication, just based on assumption instead. So it's important that when someone close to us dies, everyone, including the children, to know that they're feeling a loss. And that loss isn't just grandma or grandpa died. It's also a loss of control. We're all experiencing loss in physical form, but there's also the loss of our control. How do I love this person now that they're not here physically? How do I show them, or how do I communicate with them when I can't find them? That's what children go through a lot of times. And it's important to consider the children's needs as you're making your decisions for whatever holiday you're celebrating. Developing rituals or communication styles like that honors and keeps that person's memory alive, but it also honors our own understanding of who we are and our sense of control. Now, I will just caveat that with saying, you don't have any control. Control is the greatest illusion of our lifetime, but we have a sense of control. And that's when we don't have that sense anymore, we have a loss again. And so it's important to include the children in that, because they're still developing and trying to understand all of this. So some of the things that you might consider with children, especially small ones, is to somehow keep this open communication, if you will, open by doing something that makes sense to them. So for instance, you could hang a stocking on the fireplace for that person who died and ask the children to fill it with special letters or pictures that they draw or memories that they have. Instead of filling it with candy for someone who's not here, let's fill it with our hopes and our dreams and our memories so that they can be included in this ritual. Something else you could think about is to assign those children a task, each child a task that they could feel genuinely helpful in doing. That may be as small as setting the table or taking something outside or sitting in a chair in a certain place, whatever that is. And when we allow the children to do these things, maybe we allow the children to light the candle at the table or to say the name or whatever that is, it allows, again, their understanding that permission is individual. Like I get to do this and I get to do it in my own way. Now, for older children, at gift giving time, perhaps what you can do in memory of someone is to then give a possession or something of significance that belonged to that person who died and make that a new tradition or a new time of memory right then and there. So think about the children, especially at this time. Now let's go to the third C. Let me go back and remember what that is. The third C is compromise. Okay, this is where it gets a little tricky. When we think about compromising, it's not something that we actually love to do. If you've ever been in a relationship, however, for more than 5 minutes, you probably are going to realize that compromising is something that you're going to figure out how to do, whether you like it or not. And so what I mean by compromising during a season like this in our grief is to not only compromise with another human being outside of us, which we can do, but also to compromise our own understanding. And what that really entails is it's not the understanding forevermore, it's our understanding of right now. So I had a client just this last year who found themselves in a compromising position, if you will, around the Christmas tree. Their loved one had died just a month before Christmas. And so one part of the family thought it was not a good idea to celebrate. They were still really just getting through the funeral and all of that. And they said, let's not put up the tree this year and let's do something else or nothing at all. And then another part of the family under the same roof really wanted to put up the tree because it was their memory and how they wanted to cope and how they thought it could really help. And so they found themselves with choice again, didn't they? They could choose to battle this out, or they could choose to do nothing at all and probably not, have a very good holiday season. But they compromised and they said, okay, let's not put up the big tree. Let's put up a little one. And let's not put it in the living room where it always has been and where everybody walks through. Let's put it in the study where hardly anyone ever goes, but on assignment. And that compromise helped them so much because it gave, again, they were the ones hosting some sort of celebration. And it gave everyone the opportunity to choose. Do I want to go see the tree and to celebrate and to maybe leave a note or whatever it was they were doing, or choose not to go in there? So that compromise actually worked really well for them. Compromising comes up with our children, especially. We have to choose again and again to compromise with our kids. And as we do that, you're compromising not your values. You're not compromising your values. You're not compromising your ethics here. What you're compromising is how is everyone going to cope individually with this under the same roof? How's everyone going to strategically or intentionally strategize how to get through this in a healthy way? And how can I help another by helping myself? So think about what compromising looks like for you in this time, in your grief, in your holiday season. And allow yourself the permission, again, I'm going to use that word 1,000 times, the permission to compromise on some things. It might be something around the meal. It might be something around gift giving. It might be something around being included in parties and celebrations. And to compromise, maybe I'll go to it, but maybe I'll only stay 30 minutes instead of all night. So whatever that looks like, I want you to just think about that compromising place and that you could give yourself permission to do so. And then there's one last C that I put up, and that's an important one. It's the C that stands for compassion. It could also stand for care. And what I mean by that is there is not only compassion for others as we look at their history of loss, whether that loss was expected or unexpected, whether it was sudden loss, whether it was a violent loss, whether it was something like Tony mentioned earlier, a slow loss like dementia. Whatever that is for you, there is a blanket of compassion available for your choosing at any time, not only to give to another, but to give to yourself. You've heard the term self-care 100 times in your life. And what does it really mean, though? Because it doesn't just mean taking a hot bubble bath when you think you have time. It really means giving yourself, again, permission to make choices that would be compassionate to yourself, to your physical body, to your emotional body, to your spiritual body. And so whatever that looks like for you, think about self-care, again, as being able to verbalize the yes or the no. Either are good answers. And another really good answer is not yet. If you're not sure whether you have a really good yes to saying, yes, I'll show up to that party, or yes, I'll be included in the family tradition, maybe you could just say, I don't know yet. I'll get back about 5 minutes before it starts. I mean, maybe you just don't know yet, and that's okay. When we are in our time of loss, when we are experiencing bereavement, we are making choices and decisions all day, every day. Some of them are to us, not conscious choices. This is a time to really look at how am I going to consciously, intentionally choose something, not only for another, but for myself. It's a beautiful thing. Anyone want to share anything else before we go on? Raise your hand, just unmute yourself, type in the chat. All right, so here's what I want to do. Here's how I want to take all of this information and let it make sense to us this holiday season. I talked about the holiday plan I made with my client, and everything was upside down and backwards. I'm not going to suggest that you need to go to that extreme, although I will tell you it looked like a fun party. But I want you to think about what your holiday plan has always been, what you think your holiday plan will be for this year, and what your assumptions are in the future. So I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I want you to think about these questions that I'm going to lay out for you, and let this become a plan that's developing. I'll also share, you don't have to hurriedly take any notes. I'm going to send all of you a recording of this class along with the PowerPoint, so that you will see all of this and have it. So when you think about your holiday plan and what that entails for this year, think about what it used to entail for all the other years. And when you think about that, begin to just easily answer these sorts of questions. The most difficult parts of the season for me will be what? What do you think the most difficult parts will be? Maybe it's seeing a certain person. Maybe it is all the tinsel and glitter. Maybe it is the day itself. And then I want you to think about who it is that knows you in your pain. Who are the support people? Who hears your grief, knows your grief? And do you have them on speed dial? Are they readily available? Do you need to give them a heads up that, hey, this is a really difficult season? I may need to call you. Then I want you to think about some of the other people who are not so much supportive, but are more difficult. And the most difficult people to be with in our lives are sometimes our family. Sometimes it's those really chipper people. And when we're feeling really down in the dumps, they're really hard to be around, kind of like being the sober person at a drug party. And so I want you to think about the most difficult people that you might experience and think about choice again. Maybe it's a choice to not celebrate with them this year. Maybe it's a choice not to have conversation or communication with them right now. And then most importantly, I want you to think about what your individual unique grief triggers are. Those triggers can run the gamut. It could be a smell, like the smell of the holiday season cooking in the kitchen. It could be the smell of evergreen. It could be a sound, like the music, holiday music, some favorite song that comes on the radio. It could be anything like that. It could be something you see or read or hear, but we all have triggers. And when those come up, it's really difficult for us to choose in the moment of our trigger a really good response. But if we pre-plan and know what our triggers are, then we also pre-plan and know what our response can be. So for instance, there are triggers for everyone. We know this. And the trigger for, I'll just share my personal story here. The trigger for me around the holidays is that I don't necessarily celebrate Christmas as I celebrate kind of a winter fest, and it's the holiday season and I love it all. And so when someone comes and says, my mother died 20 years ago, I'm still in grief about that. Never will be out of it, but I've learned to cope with it. And when someone says, oh, this holiday season makes me think of your mom. She was a great cook. She was a great decorator. She loved a holiday party. Then just that conversation of taking me back to the childhood of my understanding or back to my family origin and remembering the good times triggers me into also knowing for the last 20 years that it's been very, very different since she's died. And so that's a heavy burden to carry. But because I know that's a trigger, I can have a response to them that is different than I've ever had before. So for instance, I could say, I'm so glad you have that memory. It's one of mine too, and I hold it close, rather than going into the story of, I wish it were the same. So think about that, and I'm going to go ahead and share one more screen with you because this plan isn't done. Once you know your triggers, then I want you to think about what would be most helpful for you in those times. Someone mentioned the word, I think it was Paula who mentioned the word boundaries earlier. And boundaries are important in life. And they're certainly important when we're experiencing an emotional overwhelm of any kind, like grief. And so when we know that, what would be most helpful when someone even gets close to your boundary? When we talk about boundaries, we often make a demarcation in the sand and say, you cannot come past this point. That's a boundary. But the truth is, we get triggered before they even get close to that boundary, just on the way to it. And so our defense mechanism comes up when we think they're approaching our boundary. So what would be most helpful? What are the words or the things that would be most helpful to you? Just jot a few down. And then I want you again to think back to your time prior to this loss, how you celebrated those holidays, make a little list. And from that list, I want you to take and include the traditions that you want to keep, and then the traditions that you don't want to keep. That's what finding balance is all about. Because again, it goes back to choice. I can choose to keep the traditions that make sense, that feel good, that are important or significant. And I can choose to get rid of or delete the traditions that don't make sense, that don't feel good, that maybe have run their course. And when we develop a plan like this, what happens is anytime we have something on our calendar in our future, we are developing a plan in mind of how to execute that or implement that plan. And if you don't have that part going on, then you are in what we call dread emotionally. I'm dreading the holidays. I'm dreading this day showing up because I'm dreading what I will feel based on what I've always felt, you know, the opposite thereof. So it's important to build a plan that makes sense for you. And again, one of the choices is to skip it. That's a big thing for most grievers to hear, but it's also a little bit of a relief to hear because some part of you kind of wants to do that anyway, right? And so when we think about the choice to skip the holidays, have this reminder with you. It's going to roll around again in about 364 days. It's not forevermore, that you will never celebrate another holiday. In about 300 days, everyone on the planet's going to remind you that it's here again. So this is what we talk about, getting into our reasoning mind to look at reality from the inside out. Holidays come and they go, and they come and they go, and we decorate and we take things down. And I saw a neighbor yesterday putting lights on their roof because it was a nice balmy day here. And they were putting their Christmas lights. And I thought, you know, I've lived in this house for 15 years. For 15 years, I've watched this gentleman climb up and down his roof, putting lights on. And one year, he's probably not going to do that for whatever reason. And when we understand that it's just that one time, then it's not as heavy. The burden isn't as great. That's what permission is all about. It's giving yourself permission to choose something different now, not forevermore, not for eternity, but for right now, for this year, for this holiday, for you. All right, guys, I've talked a lot. I want to hear from you. What's coming up for you? Do you have questions? Do you have thoughts? Do you have grief counseling things that you want to get off your chest? Whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you. Anyone? All right, you're a quiet group. I can go on and talk and talk. So when our whole sense of self seems, again, I use the word vulnerable, and vulnerability is like a wound. When our whole sense of self feels wounded, one of the ways that we can claim our rightful place again, our rightful presence in the world again, is to claim the legitimacy of our grief. Now, what does that mean? Well, grief, again, is the heaviest of all human emotions, and it's something that every human is going to experience. And yet, it is an emotion that we hardly ever talk about in our culture, in our society, until we have to, until it's present. And to claim the legitimacy of our grief is just that. It is to say, this is who I am right now. I am a griever. I am a bereaved person. I have witnessed chaos. I have witnessed overwhelm, whatever that is. And to understand that once you claim that, you cannot escape the reality of yourself as a grieving person any more than you can escape the reality of the death that has happened. Whether that death was a physical death of a loved one, or that death was a death of a dream, or a hope, or a desire in your life. In time, what happens is we see ourselves in broader terms. We see ourselves not just as a griever, although that may be the main aspect of our being for right now. And if it is, so be it, let it be. We may well move away from that faster, sooner, if we can embrace our reality right now. Now, I know you'd like to reach through and slap my face to say, embrace your grief, embrace your loss, when the last thing you want to do is to even commingle with it anymore because it's so tiring. But we owe no apologies to other people or to ourselves. Our grief is legitimate. We might as well embrace it, understand it, and process it, rather than holding it at bay and hoping it goes away, because it won't. I had a client yesterday. She's seeing me for grief counseling right now, and her grief is 25 years old, and she's just now dealing with it. It will come back over and over. Those triggers are not going to go away, and your healing is not going to happen until you are facing this reality. That doesn't mean I'm saying a blanket statement that it's time to face your reality. I'm saying that at some point, claim the legitimacy of your grief, of your emotional state, so that you can understand who you are right now. Our memories are always there to hook us. They are always there to hook us, to make that grief fresh again. Whether that's the holiday season that we're about to embark upon, or maybe it's a birthday or an anniversary or some significant day on the calendar. Those days, those occasions when we think about them in that first year of our grief, we call that first year the first year of firsts. Then it's the first time around without our loved one. It's the first time around without this hope or this dream. And the holiday season, when our whole world seems poised for celebration, but we are not, is of course the most difficult time because we feel a little more isolated. We feel almost against society, that they should not be doing this, or I wish they were doing something different. And when we have those thoughts going in us, is it any wonder that we cringe at the thought of the holidays when we are already battling this otherness? We will get through whatever emotion is happening. It doesn't mean that we will get over whatever's beyond that emotion. So when someone says to you, get over your grief, get over this loss, one of the communication things that you could say is, oh, I will never get over this loss, but I will get through it. I'm not through it yet. I'm not through it today, but I'm on my way through it. I hope I never get over the loss of my mother. I don't think I will, but I got through that loss, that fresh, raw grief, and have developed coping skills that will help me through the next however many years that I'm without her in physical form. And what I really want you to hear today, if you hear nothing else, hear this, that death and loss, I want to say this correctly, death or loss don't end a relationship. It simply changes the relationship. Now, what do I mean by that? When someone's died and we have burned the body or put it into the ground, it feels as though there is an absence that we cannot comprehend, that indeed that person or thing is gone, absent. But what about your relationship? Is it gone? Is it absent? I can share with you, I have a wonderful relationship with my mother, even though she's been dead for 20 years. I talked to her this morning. I'm wearing her bracelet right now because tomorrow's her birthday. There are things that we can understand that when or a grief experience happens, nothing has ended, but everything has changed. And you have the choice to communicate in different ways. You have the compassion within you to find a way to continue this relationship in new and wondrous ways that you don't even know about yet. And so when we get through our loss, when we get through our overwhelm, then we're able to reach out to others or maybe even express it in a different way. One of the things that I noticed with a particular client just recently is they had always done a beautiful thing at the holiday season, which was to go feed the homeless downtown, and then they would cook all week long at a soup kitchen for their church. And when it came time for this particular family to do this annual tradition, but without Dad, all of a sudden, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel sincere. It felt like we had to do it because we should do it because we've always done it. And so when we talked about that with them, what they were able to find was there is significance in what we've been doing. We love this tradition, this ritual we have, but it doesn't feel good right now. So they chose not to do it last year. First year they've skipped in, 15 years. And at the same time, they were able to do something different. They were able to send money to the soup kitchen. They couldn't physically show up to do it because they would have shown up with their sad faces and tears, and that wasn't what they wanted to do. But they could give in a different way. And what was so beautiful in that is that the soup kitchen sent them a note and said, we have too many workers in the kitchen this year, but the money you sent helped with the inflation that was behind the problem in the kitchen. So there was a lot of noticing and choosing there. And so they're now choosing a legacy to do just that forevermore. It's a beautiful thing when we come into that place of knowing who we are as a griever and claiming that legitimacy as a griever to make choices anew. to make choices that we never thought we would need to make or be available to make. So when we are honoring our grief and our loved ones, especially in the time of anticipating whatever this season is for you that's approaching, to simply give ourselves permission to find a moment of reprieve, of comfort, of peace, instead of those moments of the hustle and bustle that's waiting outside the door. And when you're able to do that, what happens so much of the time is that we can sit together or alone for just a little bit in that common union and find the sacredness of the process of grief, to find the sacredness of the process of who and what we are now without our loved one, whether that's individually or collectively. And then to hold that feeling for such a time and to let it go. That's the thing about emotions. You've maybe heard it's not a cliche, it's actually biblical, it's actually everything, in that all things come to pass. You've heard that, you've said that, and it's not always fun things to hear. But the truth emotionally is that all emotions come to pass. And we're going to be bombarded with emotions over our life experience that run the spectrum from joy to grief. And it means that all of our emotions are transient. They are temporary. They are impermanent. And so as they come, with our sense of control, again, you don't have any, but you have a sense of it. Our sense of control is to figure it out, to analyze this feeling, to wrap ourselves into the intellect of it and figure out how to get out of it. But really, all it's doing is coming to pass. It's not coming for you to analyze and figure out. It's coming because other things are coming too. But when we stop it, and when we try to put it under a microphone, when we try to look at it really closely, microscope, we are stopping that emotion and not allowing it to pass. So think about all the emotions coming, and the door is open by your choosing. Are you going to stop them and try to hold them at bay? Because if you do, they get heavier and heavier and heavier, and they will be more overwhelming. So as they come, notice them, give it a name if you need to give it a name. That helps sometimes. And then give it permission to pass. That is your superpower, whether you know it or not. Because when you have that sense of control and trying to figure it out, you're holding it and not letting it pass. So this is the time to affirm that, yes, this might be a hard season for me, especially this year. And I give myself permission to take this one day at a time. And if that's not enough, I'll break it down to 1 hour at a time, one 30-minute segment at a time, whatever that is. And I will acknowledge when grief hovers close to me, and in the flurry of whatever the coming weeks hold for you individually or collectively, you can remember that you're not alone on this journey. Remember, we started talking about how heavy the burden of grief is when we carry it alone. This is the time to connect. Holidays are all about connection anyway, but usually in the tinsel and all of that. But what if we connected in the tears? What if we connected in our sorrow? When that happens, we stand before a mystery because we maybe never been there before. And we can do it in common union with another because that's where our strength is, in that connection. So as you think about what your holiday season looks like and feels like, going forward, I hope some of the things that we've mentioned today have helped. Sherry says it's been 1 month since the graveside service of my husband, and I give myself permission to be where I am at today. I love that, Sherry. It is my choice. Thank you for the gift during the holidays. Thank you for this talk. You are so welcome. I hope it's helped several of you. Sherry, thanks for sharing that. To give ourselves permission to look at things differently, to feel things not as heavy as we thought they might be, but as an understanding that they are all transient, they are all impermanent. And when we allow ourselves to do that, when we allow the legitimacy of our grief and the legitimacy of who we are as a griever, then what we're also allowing is our healing to come. We're allowing the space for things to pass so that other things can come, like your healing, like joy again, like laughter again, whatever that is. And so it looks like some of you, I'm just reading through the comments, are suffering from what we call raw or fresh grief. Let this holiday season be a time off for you, if that makes more sense for you. Give yourself permission to plug in small amounts rather than a whole big holiday season. Whatever that's going to look like and feel like for you, you have permission when you grant yourself permission. I'm going to be sending you that holiday plan, and I want you to really sit down with it and think about, how can I take the things that have worked and leave the things that haven't behind? And in doing so, you create not only new traditions and rituals, but you create a new sense of control, and you create a new sense of being in your grief and in your joy. You all have been quiet but wonderful. I love being able to do things like this on a balmy afternoon, talk about Christmas and Hanukkah when it's 75 degrees and I'm sweating. But thank you for joining me. Reach out to me. I want to just say that I have some things coming up, some other classes that are going to be on my website soon if they're not already. So my website is chazwesley.com. Please pay special attention to that as often as you can and join some classes and conversations with me. I have another class coming up in January. That's one of my favorite classes on the 4 and 5th agreement. And it's a great time to plug into, what you want to do and look at in this new experience of life, in this new year of life, especially if you're doing it without someone that's always been there before. So as you are in your grief, as you are in your grace, let whatever resonated with this conversation today be just that, be the nugget that you can take and nurture and be able to put into place a plan that works for you. You all have been great. I hope this has been helpful. I'll send everything in about 48 hours to your email. And as we close today, I just want to be able to say one more time that in the place of the quiet, in the place of the honoring, the place of you coming to know who you are as a griever in a time such as this, I invite you to speak the name of your loved one more than you've ever spoken it before. The reason for that is, in our absence of someone, we absence their presence, but we also absence their personality and their character. Speak their name and keep them alive. Speak their character and keep it alive. And let whatever candle you light, whether that's metaphorically or physically, whatever candle you like, let it symbolize the light of whatever divine nurture and nature of that speaking of that name that you've spoken into this place. Be and let it continue to become, because that is the relationship that will never end. It's simply changed, and you get to step into the change of that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll let you go. I hope to hear from you. If you need some grief counseling, you know where I am. If you need a class, you know where I am. And I hope that this holiday season bears more joy and celebration than you can even imagine. But if it doesn't, don't let your sorrow take you so far down that you can't get back up. Figure out the balance, figure out how to share it, and figure out if you need help, reach out. Love to you all. Thanks for being with me today. Bye-bye.